Hey everybody, welcome to the first in a series of review videos where I'm going to take a look at all the progress check FRQ questions for the units that are going to be on the abbreviated AP Bio exam, which is units 1 through 6. Um, so I'm just going to start with unit 1 and just kind of go through, and I'm going to make one video per question to keep them as short as I can. So there's going to be, I don't know, about a dozen, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the number of questions in each one. But let's just get started. So this is question 1 for unit 1, which is the chemical basis of life, right? So pretty much chapters 3, 4, and 5, water, carbon, macromolecules. If you were, and there's corresponding prezzies, if anything, that I'm going to go over here. If you don't know, if nothing's sounding familiar, you can go back and look at our unit 2, biochem and cell biology folder, and then everything for probably the first 3 units, for first 3 AP units are in there. So that's where you can find this stuff. It's basically the course after evolution's over. Evolution, we took our evolution exam. Okay, so let's take a look at this first question here. And let's see, it says here that white blood cells called B cells produce proteins that can be used for the treatment of certain illnesses. However, these B cells do not live for very long on their own. To keep the B cells growing for a long time in laboratories, scientists fuse the B cells with cancer cells, calling them fused B cancer cells, that do grow for a very long time. The particular cancer cells are used for the fusion, are treated with chemicals that make them unable to produce the nitrogenous bases adenine and guanine, but the B cells with which they are fused do produce these nitrogenous bases. The scientists grow the large fused B cancer cells in a growth medium that contains necessary nutrients for the cells and includes a source of carbon. Okay, so you might be thinking, oh, we didn't cover the immune system. Told us not to read chapter 45. You're right, I did. The good thing is that the you don't need to know anything specific about the immune system to be able to answer these questions. These questions are actually more about the chemical basis of life, macromolecules, and how elements come together to make the components of life, which we did spend a lot of time with. So the first thing is going to be describing the role of carbon in biological systems. And that one is, so in order to answer this, there's a few things that you should probably remember about carbon. Carbon has 4 valence electrons, which enables it to bond with 4 other atoms. And that, in turn, enables it to form the backbone, if you will, or the basis of complex macromolecules like carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, proteins, macromolecules. Okay. And then the membranes of both B cells and the cancer cells are largely composed of phospholipids. Explain how, when the membranes are fused, the polar parts of the phospholipids from one cell will interact with the phospholipids from the other cell, and how the nonpolar parts of the phospholipids from one cell will interact with the phospholipids on the other cell. So, if you remember, these phospholipids are what we kind of call amphipathic. We've seen a lot of these earlier in the year that have a polar or hydrophilic head and hydrophobic, right, or nonpolar tails. And the important thing to kind of remember here for this question is that all phospholipids are the same, no matter what organism they come from or what cell they come from. Phospholipids are the same. So the polar regions will attract each other, right? The polar regions, partial positive, partial negative will still attract, right? So the polar regions will attract each other, and the nonpolar regions will want to interact with each other. So when you fuse the cells, the membranes can come together because the polar heads of the B cell phospholipids are also going to want to attract and interact with the phospholipid, the polar heads of the cancer cells. Okay, so let's check what the scoring guide sort of says. So the irony here is, as you can see, that you have 10,000 words, yet they are looking for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, about 14 words. And honestly, I don't think you need to name all of those. So probably 10,000 words to get 10 words of credit. So be careful about how much you write. I know you're going to want to write more than you need to, and that's fine. But just be careful that you're not wasting too much time talking about things that you don't need to talk about, or even worse, like circling back around and sort of contradicting yourself. So they probably won't give you credit if you put down 2 contradictory answers. Okay, and then part B indicates that the polar part of the phospholipids from one cell will align or interact with the polar parts of the phospholipids from the other cell, and the nonpolar parts of the phospholipids from one cell will align or interact with nonpolar parts of the phospholipids from the other cell. I mean, that looks an awful lot to me like restating the question, but maybe I'm not exactly sure what they were looking for, but I feel like talking about polar regions attracting or interacting with each other is probably sufficient. Okay, let's look at the second half of the question. So make a claim about the most immediate effect on the fused B cancer cells if the fused cells are transferred to a growth medium that lacks a source of nitrogen. Okay, so all you really got to think of here is, all right, so nitrogen, what has nitrogen in it? And amino acids do, so they're involved in proteins, which have nitrogens in amino acids, and also nitrogenous bases, obviously. So nucleic acids, because they are in nitrogenous bases. So if there's no nitrogen, so then the B, the cells, wouldn't be able to make proteins or DNA or RNA, right? Because all those things are going to contain nitrogen. And then, our reasoning, I guess we already provided it. So cells wouldn't be able to make proteins, DNA, or RNA, because proteins are made of amino acids, which are made of nitrogen. And nucleic acids are made of nitrogenous, contain nitrogenous bases, which contain nitrogen. So there's our reasoning. Yep. So response indicates that cells will die or that they will be unable to synthesize DNA, RNA, nucleic acids, nucleotides, and amino acids, polypeptides, proteins. Yeah, so a couple ways you could get credit there. The response indicates that nucleic acids, DNA, RNA, or nucleotides, and amino acids contain nitrogen. Okay, so that's the first question. I will post the second question in a second video, just to try to keep these short and make them as manageable as I can. Okay, thanks.